Ganondorf, Ganon, the King of Evil, the Prince of Darkness, the King of the Gerudo, the Great Calamity. But these are all just names. Who is the man? Who is the monster? Or is he both? What made him what he is? How did he come to be Zelda's most iconic villain? Sometimes he is a scheming sorcerer, sometimes an old man who is tied to the past, sometimes he pretends to be a god, and sometimes he is a force of nature. This is part of the legend. Ganon was created by Shigeru Miyamoto. Like the villain Bowser in Super Mario Bros., Miyamoto drew inspiration from Journey to the West, a Chinese mythology. The character Zubaji was the main source of inspiration for Ganon. Forgive me if I pronounced that wrong. In the original Zelda, Ganon is mentioned as the leader of the Dark Armies, possessing the Triforce of Power. He seeks Zelda's Triforce of Wisdom and captures her and holds her in his dungeon. It is up to a boy named Link to save Zelda and gather the 8 pieces of the Triforce. Most of the Zelda 1 story is told in the manual for the game, which casts Ganon's appearance as a complete mystery. You don't get a full view of him. It wasn't until the players reached the final room that they would see Ganon in the flesh. Like a vampire, Ganon lived in the dark. Later material would characterize Ganon in this game as a near mindless beast with only desire being to conquer Hyrule, but he was still sapient enough to know to capture Zelda and keep the Triforce hidden, so clearly that was a retcon. Ganon is meant to be invincible, unless you know to get the silver arrow, in which case, well, the results speak for themselves. Not a memorable boss fight by modern sensibilities, but considering the time it was made, this was something that had never been done before. Ganon would not make an actual appearance in Zelda 2 a few years later, but his shadow hung over the land of Hyrule. Some of his underlings remained, seeking to revive their master. If the blood of Link was to be spilled onto Ganon's ashes, Ganon would be resurrected, and if you got a game over, you'd see this. I think it's more effective in the Japanese version. Basically, it's saying that Hyrule is being destroyed at that moment. So while Ganon's not the main antagonist this time, his influence is still felt. Say in Mario Bros. Where Mario and Bowser go back and forth for eternity, with Link and Ganon, there is a bitter enmity. In some manga adaptations of Zelda 2, the final boss, Dark Link, is Ganon resurrected as Link's shadow. It was at this time that Ganon would appear in the short-lived Legend of Zelda cartoon, which aired as a part of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. Voiced by the late Len Carlson, Ganon is about what you'd expect from an 80s cartoon villain. I'll just let this sum him up. Yeah, there are moments where he's competent and intimidating. He has a habit of teleporting around his mountain lair. In some episodes he wants Zelda to be his bride, something they're not very consistent about. In one episode where Link and Zelda don't have their equipment, he's foiled by bees. Yeah, that's a typical 80s villain defeat. He actually makes a reappearance in the Captain N episode, The Potion of Power, which is based on Zelda 2, with Len Carlson reprising the role.
Link! How nice to see you again! And you brought your friends for my coming out party!
I guess that didn't mean what it does today. All I'll say about that, at least this time he seems to be more dangerous, as he quickly lets Mother Brain know that he's in charge. Of course, he gets taken out rather easily because of at the end of the episode real soon, so yeah, not exactly a good return to form for him. Ganon would return when the series made the leap to 16-bit graphics in A Link to the Past. The manual really fleshes out the backstory of Hyrule. I miss old-school gaming manuals. They were so detailed and filled with lore. In the first attempt to give the Zelda series a fleshed-out backstory, they explain Ganon's backstory. He was once the King of Thieves, Ganondorf Dragmire, known by his alias Mandrag Ganon. For the record, the names Dragmire and Mandrag were not in the Japanese text, hence why they don't show up after this. It is mentioned that Ganondorf slew his followers, and with blood-stained hands, he touched the Triforce, his laughter echoing throughout space and time. What Ganon wished for is unknown, but evil power began to creep from the Golden Land, later renamed the Sacred Realm. Eventually Ganon was sealed away, but centuries later, a wizard named Ganon begins sacrificing the 7 maidens, who are descendants of the 7 sages, or wise men as they were called here. Ganon has an undefined relationship with Ganon. After defeating Ganon for the second time, Ganon emerges out of him. Thus, did this mean that Ganon was possessing him? In the English text, Ganon calls Ganon his alter ego, but in the Japanese text he says Bunshin, which means split soul. But in any case, Ganon's not too happy about how Link has spoiled his plans, and doesn't plan to go down easily. In a spectacular update of the original fight, this time Ganon uses the darkness to his advantage. To damage him, you must strike Ganon with the Master Sword, and he must once again be destroyed with the silver arrows. And destroying Ganon has never been more satisfying. A Link to the Past was the first to show a more cunning side to Ganon, how he was able to manipulate others for his own end to accomplish his goals, and he would have succeeded were it not for Link. Ganon doesn't appear in Link's Awakening, in the traditional sense, but the final boss does take his form as it's based on Link's memories, thus once again giving Ganon an influence from beyond the grave. But he was set to return to the stage in a big way with the series' 3-dimensional leap with Ocarina of Time. Seeking to elaborate on the imprisoning war backstory, we are introduced to Ganon's human form, Ganondorf. His design was made by Satoru Takuzawa, who described Ganondorf as a crooked and complex thief, who was basically an all-round abominable human being. However, script director Toru Osawa claimed that this was not the case, and Ganondorf had moments where he is rather good, except that doesn't really come off too well in the actual game. Ganondorf is introduced in Link's Nightmare, setting the stage for what would be their first confrontation in the entire Zelda timeline. We learn Ganondorf's desire to enter the Sacred Realm and lay claim to the Triforce. He was the one who put a curse on the Deku Tree that sapped his life force and killed the tree, thus establishing Ganondorf as the cause of the misery that's befalling Hyrule. We see Ganondorf act subservient to the king, but Zelda knows he is not sincere. I get the sense that he's aware that Zelda is having Link gather the spiritual stones, so he's waiting for the right moment to strike. Once Link gets all 3, that's when he makes his move. We don't know exactly what happened, but it's heavily implied that something bad happened at Hyrule Castle. Most likely Ganondorf murdered the king before chasing Impa and Zelda out of the castle, and Link's nightmare comes true. Their first meeting is quite good. Ganondorf is actually impressed by the boy's bravery. You see, in this moment, I think Ganondorf actually recognized Link as a worthy opponent. This little kid has shown more heart and bravery than the entire soldiers of Hyrule, and I think that impressed Ganondorf. Of course, Ganondorf does realize it's best Link opens the door for him. In the adult half of Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf isn't seen much. He's basically spending time on his throne room, while Link is running around freeing the sages, but Ganondorf is just biding his time. He's waiting for Zelda to show herself. However, his presence is felt. Every area Link visited in Ocarina of Time has been impacted by Ganondorf, even giving the ranch to Ingo, that daft bastard. But we also learn where Ganondorf originates from. He comes from Gerudo Desert. The Gerudo are an all-female tribe, but every 100 years a male is born, and that male becomes the king of the Gerudo, and that was Ganondorf. The twin sisters Koumi and Kotake were said to be his surrogate mothers. Nabaru is implied to have been his second in command, as she mentions that he was always quite brutal in his methods. We also learn why Ganondorf is so tied to the Triforce of Power. Each wielder gets the piece they most believe in, and since Ganondorf valued power far more than wisdom and courage, that was all he could claim that day. At the end when Zelda reveals herself to Link, that's when Ganondorf makes his move and captures Zelda, even admitting his mistake to underestimate Link. Like any good villain who just captured the damsel in distress, Ganondorf taunts the hero to come and face him. What I noticed is that Ganondorf and Link have some parallels to each other in how they were raised. Both were raised by surrogate parents, but while Ganondorf was revered among the Gerudo, Link was treated as an outcast by most of the Kokiri. As Link invades the tower, you hear Ganondorf's theme playing, and as Link gets higher, the theme becomes louder. Ganondorf is classy. How else do you explain him playing his own theme on a piano? Ganondorf also shows that he will be a little different than what you've come to rely on, as you cannot see target him. The fight with Ganondorf is definitely confined to its time, as he can only be heard with the light arrow. As the fight goes on, Ganondorf's cape becomes more ripped up, which is a nice little touch, and after defeating him, Ganondorf is in complete disbelief that this kid was able to beat him. No, it couldn't be. Not this kid. I always thought it was a nice touch that as Ganondorf is laid out, his cape resembles blood. But despite this, Ganondorf gives into his rage and becomes the monster he's been keeping inside. As if to say, yeah, he was the Ganon you've known from the NES days. You see, while in the NES, Ganon was limited by hardware, here you get a bigger idea for the monstrosity that Miyamoto imagined. In the Nintendo 64 original, the final battle has Ganon shrouded in darkness, and you only get a good look at him when the lightning flashes, and each step he takes leaves a thunderous impact. Everything was riding on the line, and the final blow never felt so epic. Now sealed away in the evil realm, Ganondorf is presumably just floating there in nothingness. Frozen in that state. He can't move, he can't hear, he can't see, but he can think. And all he thinks about is how he's going to make Link and Zelda's descendants pay when he escapes. Ocarina of Time took a long-established character and showed us the man who he was before becoming a monster. Or was he always a monster? That becomes a little more complicated the further we go. But Ocarina of Time elevated the character to new heights and helped arguably make Ganondorf the man more popular than Ganon the monster, as Ganondorf would go on to highlight many more games.